So thank you and good morning. Thank you for being here today. With me are Deputy Chief Electoral Officers José Villeneuve, Michel Roussel, and Serge Caron. I'm here with key members of my team to talk about the 45th general election and services that Canadians can expect from Elections Canada. First, let me state that we are ready to deliver a secure and accessible election on April 28th and throughout the election period. Returning officers across the country have been opening local Elections Canada offices and are already serving electors. We will be serving electors in just under 500 offices throughout the election period across the country. It's important to note that this election will take place using the revised electoral boundaries established under the new representation order that was enacted in 2023, and that came into force just as yesterday with the dissolution of Parliament. Because of the redistribution exercise, electors may now find themselves in a new or revised electoral district. Of the 343 district, almost 300 have been modified in some manner. Electors do not have to wait for their voter information card to find their electoral district or to learn the ways and when that they can vote. So I encourage all Canadians to go to our website, elections.ca, for all the information they need in order to vote. That way they can make a plan early and choose the option that works best for them. The four main options remain essentially the same: voting in person on Election Day on the 20th of April, voting in person in one of the four advanced polling days from April 18th to 21, voting in person at a local Elections Canada office, or voting by mail. Over the next couple of weeks, as we start confirming polling places' location based on the now available dates, we'll publish that information on our website. By typing your postal code in the voter information service box, you'll be able to see where you can vote either at advanced polls or on polling day. Meanwhile, electors who want to vote early at a local Elections Canada office can visit electionscanada.ca to find the office nearest them. Voting in person, whether at the local office, at advanced polls, or on Elections Day, remains the simplest way to cast your ballot. I want to highlight two improvements to our in-person voting services for this election. First, the expansion of early voting options in Indigenous communities, and second, the return of the Vote on Campus program. Over the last 2 years, we've been engaging with Indigenous communities across the country to build relationships and offer more flexible advanced voting options for communities that want such an option. All communities have been offered advance and Election Day voting service opportunities. I'm pleased to say that this early engagement will result in better services for Indigenous electors, especially when it comes to advance voting services. As we speak, we estimate that there will be some 400 advanced polling locations in Indigenous communities compared to 125 at the last election, so more than 3 times as many. This is part of our important and ongoing work to remove barriers to participation for Indigenous electors, which is a priority for Elections Canada. In addition, we are reintroducing Vote on Campus for this election. So this will be the first time that we offer the program outside of a fixed date election context. The Vote on Campus program gives students and others living or working near participating campuses the opportunity to vote by special ballot for candidates running in the district where they ordinarily reside, whether home is on campus or elsewhere in Canada. We have currently agreements in place with 119 post-secondary institutions across the country for 126 locations, which is more than we had in 2015 and in 2019. Now that we have an election date and given the timing of the election, we are working to confirm with those institutions that they will be able to host the Vote on Campus. We estimate that this service will be available to approximately 1.4 million students across Canada. Dates for Vote on Campus will be April 13 to April 16. For those electors who prefer to vote by mail, this option will also be available. But electors who plan to vote by mail should do so as early as possible. They should leave enough time for their voting kit to get to them and for them to return their completed ballot to Elections Canada by Election Day. Electors who want to vote by mail can apply through our website. This is the fastest way to receive a voting kit, and voters can check online to see if their kit has been issued or if we have received their completed ballot. By law, electors who apply to vote by mail cannot change their mind and then opt to vote in person. They have to stick with that preference. Electors who vote by mail are responsible for making sure that we receive their ballot on Election Day. They should check Canada Post service standards for their particular region. Again, under federal law, ballots received by mail after Election Day must be set aside uncounted. When it comes to election results, we expect the counting of the votes to be completed on election night. As you know, in federal elections, the count is done by election workers, and that means a longer process. It also means that there can be some human error in the preliminary results, which is why the results are not official until the validation process is completed, usually within 1 week after polling day. The length of the count on election night depends on a number of factors, including voting turnout and how many people vote during advance polls. Votes from advance polls are longer to count because each advance polling division, which is the count is done by 2 polling workers, includes a significantly larger number of electors voting over 4 days. We will be monitoring turnout during advance polls and determine if adjustments are needed to ensure that we deliver results in a timely manner. Je vais maintenant passer au français. En terminant, je voudrais parler du contexte plus large dans lequel se déroule l'élection générale. Depuis la dernière élection, il y a eu des discussions importantes sur la sécurité des élections et l'ingérence étrangère. Rappelons que la commission Hogg a conclu que les 2 dernières élections générales avaient été menées avec un haut niveau d'intégrité et que nos institutions démocratiques sont solides. Mais son rapport souligne également les défis posés par l'ingérence étrangère, en particulier en ce qui a trait à la désinformation. Alors, la sécurité des élections est l'affaire de tous, que ce soit Élections Canada, les organismes de sécurité, les partis politiques, les candidats, les électeurs. Tous ceux qui participent à l'élection ont un rôle à jouer. Comme on l'a fait par le passé, on va faire tout ce qui est de notre ressort pour protéger votre droit de voter, en secret évidemment, et pour vous offrir des services accessibles et fiables. Nous continuons de travailler avec nos partenaires du domaine de la sécurité pour comprendre les menaces potentielles, pour sécuriser nos systèmes informatiques, de même que l'ensemble du processus électoral. Là, après la conférence de presse, vous aurez l'occasion d'entendre certains ministères et organismes impliqués dans la sécurité parler de leur rôle dans la protection de l'élection. De notre côté, nous avons élaboré un éventail de stratégies et de produits d'information pour protéger le processus électoral contre la mésinformation et la désinformation. Notre campagne d'information multimédia est conçue pour fournir un éventail de renseignements sur le processus électoral à tous les électeurs au Canada, où qu'ils se trouvent, quelle que soit leur langue. Nous proposons des produits d'information en quelques 50 langues. Les électeurs et ceux qui font la vérification des faits peuvent consulter notre répertoire de produits de communication officiels sur notre site Web pour vérifier si une communication vient bel et bien d'Élections Canada. Nous proposons aussi une série de vidéos et de produits numériques sur les mesures de protection des élections. Et nous avons une ressource appelée Électofaits, où nous corrigeons les idées fausses et les mythes courants au sujet du processus électoral. Nous utilisons ces produits, ainsi que d'autres, pour alerter les Canadiens lorsque des informations inexactes sur le processus électoral circulent dans l'environnement numérique. J'encourage les Canadiens à se renseigner auprès d'Élections Canada, qui est la source d'informations officielles sur le processus électoral, et à visiter élections.ca. J'encourage également les Canadiens à ne pas laisser leurs médias sociaux préférés dicter les contenus auxquels ils sont exposés. Allez lire les programmes de vos candidats, allez lire les programmes des partis politiques, prenez le temps de consulter différentes sources d'informations et d'analyse pour vous faire votre idée sur l'élection. Nous vivons dans une société ouverte et c'est à chacun d'entre nous de faire en sorte que ce soit une force et non pas une faiblesse. Enfin, j'invite toute personne désireuse de soutenir le processus électoral ou simplement curieuse d'en découvrir les rouages à venir vivre une élection de l'intérieur, ne serait-ce que pour une seule journée. En travaillant pour nous, vous ferez partie des quelques 200 à 250 000 Canadiens qui font des élections fédérales une réalité. Alors, les Canadiens âgés de 16 ans et plus peuvent travailler pour nous et contribuer à la démocratie canadienne et découvrir aussi comment ça fonctionne. J'encourage également les élèves et les étudiants de moins de 18 ans à participer au programme de simulation vote étudiant. Plus tôt ils se familiarisent avec le système électoral, plus ils seront susceptibles de voter lorsqu'ils auront l'âge de le faire. Une démocratie vigoureuse dépend de la participation des citoyens. Je vous invite donc tous à prendre part à l'élection de différentes manières, mais surtout à venir voter en grand nombre. Je me ferai un plaisir de répondre à vos questions. I'm happy now to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. As I said at the outset, we'll begin in the room with questions. One question, one follow-up. If time allows, we will then move online. For any participants online, please use the raised hand function to indicate you would like to have a question. We will begin with Chris Nardi.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for this press conference. First question, do you have an estimate on the cost of this general election?
Yes, so the estimate at this point is $570 million. It's an estimate. As I said, we're aiming to hire, for example, between hopefully 250,000 workers. It may be less, and that will impact, for instance, the cost of the auction. We have on our website a cost estimate that's a year old, so it's a bit out of date. We will update that. Right now, we're looking at about $570, which is slightly less than the last election.
And so I was diving into the incredibly long Hogue report again, and there are a lot of the recommendations that either involve your office or legislative changes that would impact your office. Can you tell me how many, or even if any, of these recommendations have been implemented, either the ones impacted that were under your purview or any of the legislative changes, which I'm assuming didn't happen because there was no Parliament sitting since this report was published. But how many, if any, of these recommendations impacting you have been implemented?
So the recommendations that pertain to Elections Canada were in fact recommendations that I made to Parliament and to the Commission, and Commissioner Hogg largely endorsed those recommendations, but they were recommendations for legislative changes. So we'll see when Parliament resumes if these are examined and come to fruition. I think we've made some adjustments for this election in light of what we saw at the Commission on Foreign Interference. For instance, we've increased messaging around the secrecy of the vote. It was clear that some electors felt intimidated in voting, and I thought it was important to remind electors in different languages through different mediums that the vote is secret, whether they vote in person at the office of the returning officer, at advance polling day, or whether they vote by mail, that the vote is absolutely secret. So we've made some adjustments to our communication strategy, and we always adjust based on the evolving environment.
We'll go next to Jesse with the Hill Times.
Yes, hello, Jesse Knockhart with the Hill Times. My question's actually very similar. I would just like, do you have anything to say about how would you say the risk of foreign interference in this upcoming election compares perhaps to previous elections, and similarly, what kind of measures can help ensure election integrity?
So you'll hear from security partners after this press conference, and we are working closely with them to be always alert to evolving threats. I think we've learned from the Commission that there are a range of countries that can have or have an interest in Canada's electoral process. But we've also learned from the Commission that our process is robust. So I am confident that we will deliver a safe election as we have in the past.
But again, are there any particularly heightened concerns at this time about foreign interference, particularly from social media actors, such as from the United States or Elon Musk, for Canada's upcoming election?
So I'm not aware of specific threats, if that's what you're asking. In terms of the context in which we're operating, I think people are expressing, I've seen concerns expressed about actors in the U.S. expressing their views. We live in an open society. That comes with receiving messages, hearing influence from people in Canada and abroad, and that is not contrary to our electoral process or the rules in Canada.
Melanie Marquis.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur Perrault. Quel est le plafond des dépenses pour chaque parti pour cette année?
Je crois qu'il est de 37 millions.
Oui, alors ça va être 35,5 environ le million si un parti a des candidats dans toutes les circonscriptions, les 343. Ça va varier d'un parti à l'autre.
Juste peut-être préciser dans quelle mesure ça varie si les partis n'ont pas 343 candidats. Par ailleurs, comment est-ce que vous assurez la surveillance des réseaux sociaux pour vous assurer que ce plafond-là est respecté? Par exemple, qu'il y a des vidéos qui ne sont pas considérées comme des dépenses électorales venant de tiers partis ou pas. Donc, peut-être juste la précision, puis ensuite votre réponse.
Le fonds est calculé en fonction du nombre de candidats endossés par un parti dans les circonscriptions. Donc, les partis qui ont moins de candidats vont avoir un plafond plus bas. Il y a une formule là, qui est prévue à la loi électorale qui donne le calcul pour les partis pour chaque élection. Pour ce qui est de notre veille des médias sociaux, notre veille vise spécifiquement à s'assurer qu'il n'y a pas d'informations qui empêcheraient les électeurs de voter. Donc, notre veille des médias sociaux n'est pas une veille de conformité au processus électoral. C'est une veille qui vise à s'assurer qu'il n'y a pas d'informations erronées ou d'autres informations qui pourraient empêcher les électeurs de voter. On fait une veille dans 22 langues pour cette élection-ci. On surveille 62 plateformes numériques. Mais le but de la veille n'est pas de faire de la surveillance de conformité à la loi électorale. Alors, s'il y a des activités de tiers, par exemple, qui seraient des activités réglementées, on se rappelle qu'il n'y a pas de période pré-scrutin ici, on n'est pas dans une élection à date fixe, mais si pendant l'élection, il y a des activités de tiers qui seraient réglementées, les gens peuvent alerter Élections Canada. On a des mécanismes pour interagir avec les tiers, mais on ne fait pas de veille de conformité en tant que telle.
Emily Hawes, Globe and Mail.
Hi there. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith told a U.S. podcast that she asked the Trump administration to pause tariffs until after the Canadian election in hopes of seeing Conservative win. Do you consider that foreign election interference?
So elections interference is something that is not a term that's used in the Elections Act, but there's a number of provisions in the Act that may be relevant to foreign interference. So, for example, there is a provision on undue influence by foreign entities. There are rules on spending and third-party activities. The facts that you refer to do not trigger any of these.
Okay, thank you. And the Chief Electoral Officer, which I guess is you, has changed how election security budgets are done for candidates. There's now a personal security budget for candidates and their families. Up to $5,000 is reimbursable. And some people have told me that that amount seems low. I was just wondering, why was the $5,000 budget chosen as kind of the reimbursable amount?
So just to be clear, it's not a budget. So security expenses vary in nature. Some are about the security of the candidate's office, some are the personal security of the candidate. So we've provided guidance on different ways in which they can report the cost related to security. The different categories of expenses under the Act carry different consequences in terms of sources of the money, the maximum spent, and whether they are reimbursable. Some of the security expenses are personal in nature, and I can impose a cap. And the reason for imposing a cap is not to limit the amount of money, but rather to limit the amount under that category that is reimbursable, okay, which in this case is $5,000, and not subject to limits on the source of funding. Okay, so candidates who spend more on their personal security can do so. They would report that, for example, as other electoral campaign expenses. So there are different categories, but this particular cap is to limit the reimbursable amount of money because personal expenses are not subject to limits on sources of funding.
Fraser, ATBTN.
About, I think with Indigenous communities and 400 increase from 125 to 400. Is that polling stations in First Nations communities, or can you just explain that a bit?
These are advanced polls, so we offer to all communities, to be clear, voting services, both for advance and for polling day services. What's different for this election is because of the fact that in some cases, very small, remote communities do not have the capacity to support in terms of space and workers more than just 1 or 2 days, nor is there need because they're small communities. We offer, because the Act permits it, a flexible service offering. So we've been engaging with those communities and come to a preliminary agreement that's being finalized as to how they wish to be served for advanced polls. And so in a number of cases, it's less than 4 days because that's what they wish. These engagements that we've done over the last years have led to a significant increase in uptake in voter services for advanced poll, and that's what I referred to in my remarks.
I guess Métis communities or First Nations or anywhere really?
Correct.
Okay.
And in fact, there, within the numbers, not the 400, but we've engaged also in other remote communities that are neither Indigenous nor Métis.
Nick, CP?
Craig Lord, the Canadian Press. It's okay. We woke up to some inclement weather in Ottawa here, but wondering how Election Canada is feeling about potential spring flooding or late snowstorms affecting accessibility in this upcoming election.
So thanks. That's a good question. You know, in a country the size of Canada, we have to expect that there will be some severe weather events. No matter when the election takes place, it's only a matter of where and how many. In some cases, we've seen floods, we've seen fires. This morning we're having snow, so we have to be ready to adjust to that. In past elections, we've had to deal with displaced populations, and so there's a range of measures that we can take, including voting outside of the electoral districts for displaced communities. We are monitoring closely for the spring how the water levels in the rivers are increasing or will increase, and make the necessary adjustments.
Okay, we have time so we can go online. If there are any participants online who would like to ask a question, can you please use the raise hand function on Zoom? I'll give you a second to register. Okay, we will start with Palak from Parliament today. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the on-campus voting services. Commissioner, you mentioned that there are agreements with schools, but those agreements so far capture 1.4 million students. We heard in the tech briefing that's about 60% of the overall student population. But can you speak to the efforts that are underway to maybe bump that figure up to, closer to 100?
So I think I got most of your question. Sorry, the sound is far from ideal. If I understand correctly, is your question is on efforts to improve the uptake of campus voting services. So we've been working over the last few years with campuses, with post-secondary institutions across the country to identify those campuses that are of significant size that are willing to take part in this initiative. We have now more campuses and more voting locations on campus than we've had in previous elections. If there are campuses that have not yet made arrangements with Elections Canada, I would invite them to come forward as quickly as possible. But we have been working with student organizations across the country to make sure that we offer to as many locations as is possible.
Just as a follow-up, I'm seeing that the deadline for closing nominations is April 7th. So April 9th is when voters can see their final list of candidates. The last election, there was a case where the Liberals had booted somebody out, but that candidate's name had still appeared on the ballot. So is there any thought to dealing with such a case if it arises this time around?
So that's a good question. It's something that arises just about every election. Things happen between close of nominations and polling day, or even advanced polling days, that may cause a person not to want to be a candidate, or party not to want to endorse that candidate anymore. But the law is very clear. There's a very fixed period of time for which the nomination can take place, and then the confirmation is within the next 2 days. After that, the law does not allow for changes either to the candidates' names, their endorsements, because we need that time to make sure we print the ballots, we do the quality controls, and deliver those ballots for advance polls across the country, sometimes in very remote locations. So the law governs here. It's not something that Elections Canada can modify.
I don't see any other questions online, so I'm going to use my moderator's privilege to ask a question, and then we'll come back to the room. I'm curious, we're in an interesting position. I suppose all elections have, a government that needs to keep governing while there's an election going on. But the particular, the ballot box question here, Donald Trump, how do you distinguish from like an oversight or an elections expenses point of view when the government is campaigning versus when it's governing?
So there are Treasury Board directives regarding the use of government funds and in particular government advertising during an election. I trust that the government will follow those directions as we move forward.
Is there oversight, though? Is somebody paying attention and wondering, hey, is that the Foreign Affairs Minister or is that the candidate for riding X out right now?
I can assure you that there's a lot of oversight, including by people like yourself and the electors. And that's the system, that's how it should work. So if there are contraventions of this or any other nature, if people believe that the laws are not being respected, then they should contact Elections Canada or contact the Commissioner of Canada Elections, who's responsible for enforcement.
Okay, we'll go back to the room. Melanie?
Oui, merci. Juste une précision encore sur le plafond des dépenses. J'ai oublié de demander pour le Bloc québécois si vous avez un chiffre à m'offrir, parce qu'évidemment, ils n'ont pas des candidats dans les 343 circonscriptions. Puis peut-être, M. Perrault, est-ce que vous pourriez expliquer en détail comment va fonctionner le décompte des voix le jour de l'élection de 28? Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on compte en premier? Les votes postaux, les votes par anticipation? Qu'est-ce qui arrive en premier? Juste donner une idée aux gens de la façon dont ça va se passer le 28.
Oui, pour le Bloc québécois, comme tous les partis, le plafond va dépendre du nombre de candidats. Alors, on ne sait pas à ce stade-ci. On ne sait pas il y a combien de candidats. On verra combien. On verra que si le Bloc endosse des candidats dans l'ensemble des circonscriptions, suite à quoi il y a un calcul qui se fait. Donc, ça peut varier selon les circonstances. Pour le dépouillement du vote, écoutez, je vais inviter mon collègue Michel Roussel à compléter, mais de façon générale, ce que je dirais, c'est que les différents dépouillements se font en parallèle. C'est-à-dire que le vote postal, il y a un dépouillement qui se fait. Pour celui qui a lieu à l'administration à Ottawa, sur la rue Coventry, c'est un dépouillement qui n'attend pas la fin des autres dépouillements. De la même façon, le dépouillement des bulletins spéciaux au bureau des directeurs du scrutin procède en parallèle. Le soir de l'élection, le dépouillement se fait pour à la fois le vote par bulletin spécial, à la fois le vote pour le vote par anticipation, et le vote le jour de l'élection. Les préposés au scrutin qui ont servi les électeurs sont appelés à faire le dépouillement. Et donc, pour le vote par anticipation, il y a souvent un plus grand volume. Là. Il y a des urnes qui couvrent un plus grand nombre d'électeurs. D'abord, les listes électorales pour le vote par anticipation couvrent un plus grand nombre d'électeurs. Il y a des électeurs qui peuvent voter sur 4 jours. Et on a vu la tendance dans les dernières années à une augmentation. Alors ça, va falloir ajuster. C'est arrivé par le passé que je doive autoriser un dépouillement qui commence avant la fermeture du vote. Ce dépouillement-là du vote par anticipation se fait évidemment à huis clos. Les gens qui y participent, les observateurs, ne peuvent pas sortir avant que tout le dépouillement soit complété. Donc, il y a certains ajustements qui peuvent être faits pour tenter d'éviter un prolongement indu des résultats.
Si je peux me permettre d'ajouter, tout ce que le DGA a dit est vrai. J'ajouterai simplement que nous invitons les représentants des candidats, les partis politiques, à observer, à participer, à s'engager, à s'impliquer s'ils ont quelques doutes, quelques questions sur le processus de vote lui-même pendant la journée ou le processus de dépouillement. Que ce soit à Élections Canada, au centre de réception des bulletins votés de l'étranger, on peut accueillir des représentants des partis politiques, que ce soit sur les lieux de scrutin le soir de l'élection où le dépouillement se fait, ou encore au bureau des directeurs et des directrices du scrutin, où on fait le dépouillement des bulletins qui ont été votés par la poste à l'intérieur de chacune des circonscriptions. Donc, on a besoin de l'engagement des partis politiques et des candidats pour faire cette surveillance-là.
Where French or English isn't the first language, there has been input before of availability of Indigenous languages at polling stations. Has there been any changes there? And I guess maybe just another quick question with that. Has there been any a lot of elders use or did use proxy votes? I remember there have been some changes with ID in that regard. Has there been any changes there in the proxy voting?
So we don't have, just to be clear, we don't have proxy voting at the federal level. We do have letters of attestation from band leaders to assist voters who do not have the required proofs of identification with address to support them in making sure that they vote. In terms of the languages that are used at the polling locations, our first priority is to recruit within the communities. So the best way to ensure that we have voting services in the language of the community for Indigenous communities is to do the recruitment in community. And that's been part of our efforts over the last 2 years, not just to make sure that we have access to the community in terms of voting locations, but hopefully having the people in the community support the voting process.
I guess in terms of rather than having things in written, there's people orally there that are able to assist voters, or?
So if the poll workers are from the community, they are able to engage with the voters within the community. That's the best way that we can offer services in the Indigenous languages. We do have initiatives to offer more translation of products in Indigenous languages. We have roughly, I think it's 20 languages that are translated. We have over 30 products in Nunavut that have been translated for this election in Inuktitut. So we're making efforts to offer a more diversity of Indigenous languages at the polls. But in terms of the service itself to the elector, the primary means is through the poll workers. We also have an elder and youth program for Indigenous communities to assist voters in the community. So if it's not the poll worker, the elder and youth that are part of the process at the polls can also provide assistance there.
And we'll wrap up with Chris Nardi.
Hey, I think I have two questions. The first is we've heard previously that there have been some changes in how Elections Canada allows spending approvals for by returning officers to basically protect polling locations and all that. And so now all the spending would be pre-approved basically instead of having to apply for it. Can you just give a bit of explanation as to why that change has happened and what are some of the tensions that have led to that change?
So in the last election, we saw that there were some tensions. Just in case people have forgotten, this was the pandemic elections, and there were tensions in that elections around pandemic measures, and we saw that at the polls. So there were a number of instances where we did approve returning officers having budget to provide security in some locations at the last election. This time around, rather than having to do a case-by-case approval as we go, we provided initial budgets for returning officers based on their assessment in discussion with the situation at the poll to decide, or in the relevant community to decide whether security is needed. This is a preventive measure. Things can evolve in an election in a way that are not necessarily foreseen. There can be tensions around international events that cause tensions at the polls, protests. So the returning officers now have the budgetary latitude to react quickly and, if necessary, provide security, additional security at the polls. But it is not something that we would provide across the board, nor do we expect that it be needed on a large scale.
And you had written as part of the Hogue Inquirer, but also generally just recommendations to the government that specifically targeted deep fakes, amongst other things. Obviously, you've already mentioned that no legislative changes have happened since. So I'm curious, how concerned still are you about AI, generative AI, deep fakes, technologies influencing our election? And is that a real threat that people should be looking out for, that you're very concerned about?
It is a serious concern. There was a report recently by the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity highlighting the extent of that threat. Synthetic material has been used in elections around the world over the last year to provide misleading content. So it is a serious concern. It's also a concern because people tend to overestimate their ability to detect what you refer to as deep fakes. So people seem to be more confident than they actually are capable about detecting it. Now, we have partners from the Centre for Cybersecurity and security partners that will be on the lookout. We at Elections Canada have a repository of our materials, our communication materials. So if something looks like it's from Elections Canada, but it is a bit fishy, someone can verify on our website whether actually this is content that is coming from Elections Canada. I have written to all of the key social media platforms to engage them and seek their support to making this election a secure election. And as we've discussed before, we have a range of information products about the electoral process that are there to help Canadians see clearly about what's true.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in for one more. The writing that you did to the platforms, can you tell me which platforms you wrote to and what did they respond, if anything?
So I wrote to the main platforms, can give you a list offline afterwards. We did receive some responses from X in particular, for example, from TikTok. Responses that they accept that there is a concern about the synthetic content that can be misleading, and that they have committed to taking action in that regard. So we'll see what happens during the election if their commitment holds true, but they have made that commitment.
Can you just tell me when that was, when you wrote them, when you heard back recently?
Yes, so I wrote in February, a few weeks into February, and I've been receiving some responses very, very recently.
Broadly, are you satisfied with the responses? Sorry, I just keep. Are you satisfied with the responses?
On the face of it, those who have responded have provided some satisfactory responses. As I've said, we'll see what action actually takes place during the election. Hopefully, they won't have to intervene. But if there are issues, hopefully they will be true to their word.
And I will then close with asking, will you make those letters public in their responses so that people can see publicly what the platforms are saying they will or won't do during this campaign?
So you're reading my mind. Yes, I do intend to make my letter and the platform's response public.
Okay. And with that, we will close for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci.